Good evening. I'm just going to hold on for a few more minutes while everyone joins. We have about 100 people registered and there are 36 on the call at the moment, so I'll just give them some more time. So there are still people coming in. We're now up to 41, 42. So I will just leave another minute for people to join before we start. Okay, we're up to 48 participants on the call now, and it's 3 minutes past 6, so I will now make a start, and obviously other people may still join. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Bill Stothart. I'm Chair of the Trustees of Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming you all to the annual general meeting of the Trust. In the next hour, we'll be covering the achievements and the accounts for the year April 2020 to March 2021 and the formalities of the AGM. After reviewing the activities, successes and achievements of the last financial year, we'll be holding a wildlife event with a panel to discuss your questions. So just some housekeeping first. We expect this Zoom call today to last for about 2 hours. You should all have received some information in advance. That's the agenda, the minutes from last year, the candidate trustee profiles, and the accounts for the year we're looking at, which is the year up to March 2021. So there are now 50 people on the call, and we've received 49 proxies in advance. So we're fully quorate. All the attendees are on mute and the presenters can't see you. Although we can't see you, the Zoom call is being recorded, and that's so that we can make sure any points raised in the chat or in the Q&A are dealt with either during the meeting or afterwards. You can ask questions via the question and answer at the bottom of your screen at any point during the meeting. We'll answer as many questions as we can if we have time during the meeting, or we'll follow up with you afterwards. So in a moment, Felicity Goody will take us through the normal business of the AGM, and then we'll hold the wildlife panel. we'll be using a polling function to vote on the resolutions. So these will pop up on your screen at the appropriate times as we go through the meeting, and you'll have a few moments to vote for, against, or to abstain from each resolution. So a very warm welcome. I hope you enjoy today's meeting, and I'll hand over to Felicity Goody, who is President of Cheshire Wildlife Trust, to take us through the AGM. Felicity.
Thank you very much indeed, Bill, and welcome everybody. It's my great pleasure to be the president of the trust, and so this is my one big day, really, hosting the annual general meeting, and you're all extremely welcome. It's the 58th annual general meeting, of course, and the second to be held online, and I can see more people are joining us all the time. So if you are just joining us, you're very welcome too. It would be very easy, you know, for an introduction to something like this to be full of gloom, because after all, we all know that nature really is in crisis, and changes to the climate are beginning actually to kill people and drive millions out of their homes. All of that really is now indisputable, and even the naysayers seem to have woken up and smelt the coffee. But whether you regard the COP26, which is of course beginning to come to a conclusion in Glasgow, whether you regard that as having made real progress, or like a certain young lady dismissed it as a global North Greenwash festival, which I thought was a really rather nice turn of phrase. Well, whatever you think about what the politicians are doing or not doing, on the ground here in Cheshire, there is real cause for optimism, and tonight we're going to celebrate some of that. We can't change the world on our own, of course, but we are making a measurable impact on habitats for wildlife in our county. And what's more, our voice is getting louder, it's getting stronger, and it's actually beginning to be heard by those who can make a difference on a much wider scale. COVID has been, of course, a challenge for everyone, but at a time when most charities have struggled to keep their supporters, and have in fact often suffered from declining membership, we here in Cheshire, in the Cheshire Wildlife Trust, have gone in absolutely the opposite direction. Our membership continues to grow. The Cheshire Wildlife Trust alone now has more than 17,000 members. 17,000. That's incredible. And it was a record year for engagement. 53,000 people connected with us to follow our work. We saw significant increases in visits to our nature reserves, and the number of people who are following us online, on social media these days, positively soared. So the politicians may be paying lip service to wildlife and climate crisis, but there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions now, of ordinary citizens like us who are beginning to get active. The Secretary of State for the Environment, George Eustace, chose Delamere Forest and our Cheshire Wildlife Trust to announce new targets and funding for tree planting and peatland restoration. Why did he come to us, and why to Delamere? Well, for once, it wasn't the charms of our wonderful beavers. Government ministers are beginning to realise that between us, the Wildlife Trusts now have more members than any single national political party. And our memberships are not only growing, they're becoming much more vocal and much more active. We also support the main wildlife campaigns, as well as our own local ones. We sign petitions, we write to our MPs, and it is beginning to have an effect. So please, the next time we ask you, or the national organisation, the overarching organisation of the Wildlife Trust asks you to sign a petition or to write to your MP, please don't leave it to somebody else. It really does count when you get involved too. The more active we are, the more those vital government policies will start to change. Yes, this is cross-party lobbying, but we don't pay anyone to do that for us. We as citizens do it ourselves, and that is how parliamentary democracy is supposed to work. One of the best partnerships we have is with the farming community. Cheshire, as I'm sure you all know, has a lot of challenges. We have hardly any tree cover in our county. And in fact, this county has far fewer trees than any other county in the whole of England. And we, of course, are home to a huge commercial dairy industry. But even now, some of our biggest landowners are beginning to rethink the way that they use the land. So we're working with more than 100 farmers and landowners, from the owners of small holdings with just a few acres to some of the biggest estates in Cheshire, including Cholmondeley and the ginormous Grosvenor estate. In partnership with the Trust, they're leading a radical plan to transform farming, to change farming practice, to nurture instead wildlife, to reduce the use of artificial fertilizers and pesticides, in short, to revitalize the soil and create a healthy, productive environment for the future. You are the Cheshire Wildlife Trust. It's because of your support and passion that we're beginning to reverse decades of destruction. So if you haven't already, please do subscribe to our new YouTube channel. It's been set up and run by a young 19-year-old zoology student called Alex Collins, and it's to showcase the Trust's work. I believe me, it will gladden your hearts to tune in. There is cause for optimism here. So before we proceed with the formal proceedings of the business of the Trust's AGM, let's spend a few more minutes looking at some of our achievements over the past 12 months. And to do that, I'm now going to hand over to our Chief Executive, Charlotte Harris.
Thank you, Felicity. The last 18 months have brought with them many challenges, but despite financial uncertainty, lockdowns, and limitations on our activities, I'm delighted to report that delivery of our 2030 strategy launched at last year's AGM has got off to a tremendous start. Felicity has highlighted the growth in our supporter base, campaigns' impact and reach to new audiences, but we've also made progress on our goal to make 30% of land in Cheshire great for wildlife by 2030. So during the year up to March 2021, Cheshire Wildlife Trust, with your help, protected, restored and created over 8,000 hectares of land. This included restoring 26 kilometres of river, establishing 13 hectares of new wildflower meadow, planting 36 hectares of woodland and advising over 100 farmers and landowners. Working with communities, parish councils and local authorities, we protected over 7,000 hectares of land through our planning advice, neighbourhood planning policies and nature recovery network mapping. We also found time to calculate our own carbon footprint, and this year we're developing a plan to be at least net zero by 2030. We are bringing wildlife back. As you all know, we welcome beavers back to Cheshire for the first time in 400 years, and Willow and Rowan have settled in well to their Delamere home and are starting to make their mark, coppice trees and raising the water levels. Elsewhere in the forest, where we've restored 145 hectares of mossland in the last 5 years, our previous reintroduction of the white-faced darter continues to bear fruit. We had confirmation of breeding success again this year and evidence that they've started to spread out to new pools. We've also created 94 new ponds for great-crested newts, planted sea holly at our Red Rocks Marsh Reserve to help the grayling butterfly, and worked with farmers to improve water quality and bankside vegetation along the River Gowie for water voles. At Gowie Meadows, 2 new species were recorded, the great-crested grebe and cattle egret, and the marsh harrier was sighted hunting over the site more than 20 times. Lapwinger confirmed as breeding at Bickley Hall Farm, and a survey of Crown Farm Quarry revealed 192 plant species, 64 bird species, and a whole host of invertebrates that stand to make the site potentially nationally important. This year, we're looking to the future as we further develop our expertise in biodiversity net gain, and to share this knowledge with others, we've trained over 500 people so far. We're pleased to announce that we've secured 3.5 years of funding for the Our Dee Estuary project, and that will start in January 2022. And we've launched Wild Stockport, a project to engage people with wildlife on their doorstep, and also expanded our Wellbeing with Nature programme. We have plans in the pipeline to create more woodland, and you'll be aware of our current fundraising appeal to buy Salterswood Farm, where we hope to create a brand new nature reserve. So it's been a busy year and we have ambitious plans ahead. So thank you for your support. We couldn't bring wildlife back without you. Now, as the old saying goes, a picture paints 1,000 words. So let me leave you with a short film that shows you more about our highlights from the year. Thank you.
Well, if that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what will. Let's now begin the formal business of the 58th Annual General Meeting of the Cheshire Wildlife Trust. And the time is 19 minutes past 6. I've no apologies received from members or trustees. I just have one apology from Jamie Richards, who is a candidate for becoming a trustee. He sent his apologies because he's on holiday with his family. I believe there to be 70 members present, and I've received proxy voting slips from 49 members. So we are well and truly quorate. The first thing on our agenda is the minutes of the 57th AGM, which was held on the 12th of November 2020. You should have had plenty of opportunity to see the minutes. They've been posted on our website for some time. First of all, are there any factual corrections, please, to these minutes? If there are, will you indicate by putting a few words onto the Q&A function now? I'll just pause for a second just to give you the opportunity to do that. Does anybody have any factual corrections, please? I don't see any activity on the Q&A, in which case I'm going to take it that there are no factual corrections and that I can confirm the minutes to be a true and accurate record of the meeting. And so we can move to their formal adoption. And that is being proposed by Bill Stoddard and seconded by Charles Mean. As I say, I received 48 proxy votes in favour and there was 1 abstention. So now we will take the vote using the online poll. The question with the voting options appears on your screen now, and you should choose either for, against, or you can abstain if you wish, but please do cast your vote. And as soon as everybody has cast their votes, and we can see them racking up, I hope, then we will close the vote, or I will allow a minute, whichever is the sooner. How are we doing on the voting? I don't have a view of the voting going on, so I'm reliant on other people to tell me what's happening. Aha, here we go. The minutes of the 57th AGM are adopted. It looks to me as though everybody is for, 85% are for, 15% have abstained. Right, but that means that the minutes have been adopted and the proposal has been formally carried. Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's move on then to the report and accounts for the year ended the 11th of March 2020. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Peter Rushton, our Treasurer, and he'll go through the accounts for the 12-month period ending on the 31st of March 2021. The accounts, again, have been available on the CWT website in advance of this meeting. They've been up there since the 22nd of October. We haven't received any questions in advance about the accounts, but if you would like to raise a question today, please, again, post it on the Q&A function. And you can do that while Peter is presenting the accounts, and then I will endeavour to ask him to answer all your queries at the end of his presentation. But now I'm going to hand over to our Deputy Treasurer, Peter Rushton.
Good evening. I'm Peter Rushton, Chair of Finance, Audit, Risk and Resource Committee and Treasurer for the Trust. I'm pleased to present this year's accounts. There is no doubt that 2020 was a difficult year for everyone. During the financial year up to March 21, the Trust took steps to ensure that it adapted to the changing circumstances brought about by the pandemic and the opportunities afforded by its new strategy and a heightened sense of awareness of nature and climate crisis by the government and public alike. As a result of these actions, I'm able to report a good performance overall for the year. Total income for the year was 2.29 million, which is slightly lower than the previous year of 2.37 million. However, the Trust was also in receipt of an additional £333,000 worth of income that was deferred into the current year. This was evidenced in the total cash at the year end, which stood at over 1.1 million for the first time. These were mainly funds for restricted projects received in advance of delivery. The overall surplus for the year was 51,000 and is now the 5th year in a row that the Trust has achieved an overall surplus. Our 3 main income streams, which total 85% of the Trust's income, are grants, which account for 35%, contracts, which account for 28%, and membership subscriptions, which account for 22% of total income. Grants income increased from 620,000 in the previous year to 700,000 this year. Income from donations, which includes membership and legacies, fell from 687,000 in the previous year to 620,000 However, membership numbers grew during the year and the financial benefits of this are being seen in this current year. Our Beaver appeal was particularly successful, raising over 70,000 in donations and attracted more than 1,500 new members. Contract income increased again by a further 10% to 542,000, and this trend is expected to continue through the current year. In addition, our subsidiary company, Cheshire Ecological Services, donated a net profit of 89,000. During the year, the services offered by CES were integrated into the trust and are now managed alongside our core nature recovery work. This is a simpler governance model and enables a multi-skilled team to take on larger and more complex projects. The subsidiary company has ceased trading and will be made dormant during the year. Turning to how we spent the money we received, I'm pleased to report that 1.5 million was spent directly on nature recovery and community engagement programmes. Expenditure on support costs were similar to the previous year at 387,000, and total salary costs reduced slightly from 1.29 million in the previous year to 1.18 million. This was due to some staff being placed on furlough and some redundancies made mid-year. The staffing levels have now bounced back to ahead of where they were pre-pandemic, and the current headcount is 54. Expenditure in generating income, in particular contract income, decreased by 85,000, and this demonstrates the efficiencies gained by integrating the CES operations into CWT. Finally, just under 16% of total expenditure was spent on raising funds through memberships, appeals and the like, compared with just under 19% in previous years. In terms of overall financial health, at March 21, the group had cash reserves which are sufficient to cover 3.1 months of unrestricted expenditure. While this is below the target of 4 months, it represents an improvement on the previous year, which was 2.4 months. I'd just like to thank all the staff, members and funders for the continued support. And I'd like to hand back over to Felicity. If there is any questions, then please ask away.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Well, I don't see any questions appearing on the chat function, so this really is your last chance to answer any questions. Just put a word, say question, on the chat function if you really want to do so. But since I can see no questions, I'm going to move straight on to the vote in that case. And the motion is that the report and accounts for the year to the 31st of March 2021, together with the auditor's report thereon, be received and adopted. And I have a proposer in Peter Rushton, and it's seconded by Steve Judd. There were 48 proxy votes received in advance in favour and 1 abstention. So please vote now. You will see on your screen, you can vote for, against, or you can abstain. And I'll give you a minute to do so, or less than that if you are terribly quick and you don't need a full minute. And I can't actually this year, unfortunately, see the votes racking up. Ah, there we go. Fine. So 96% of you have voted in favour. There is at least 1 abstention, but I declare that the vote has been carried and that the motion to adopt the report and accounts for the year 31st of March 2021 has been passed. Thank you very much, and thank you, Peter. So let's move on then to the election and remuneration of the auditors. I ask that members officially, or rather the resolution asks that the members officially ask that adopt Mitchell Charlesworth be reappointed as auditors to the company for the year, and that the council be authorised to agree the auditors' remuneration for the period. I have a proposer in Peter Rushton, and it's seconded by Samantha Ridsdale. I have 48 proxy votes received in advance in favour and 1 abstention. And again, will you please vote now as to whether you are happy with that proposal. So for, against, or abstain, the resolution is that our auditors be invited to be Mitchell Charlesworth. They be invited to continue as our auditors for another year. And do we have a result? Can we see a result yet? I think we can. Yes, we can. So at least 94% have you voted in favour of this motion. Therefore, I declare the resolution that Mitchell Charlesworth be reappointed as auditors carried, and also that the company, that the council be authorised to agree the auditor's remuneration. Thank you very much indeed for that. Brings me now to the election and the re-election of council members. First of all, the re-election of council members. We have 3 of our council members who are standing for re-election. The resolutions are as follows: that Stephen Judd be re-elected for a further 3 years under Article 3.5. He's proposed by Sarah Williams and seconded by John Roscoe. That Charles Neame is re-elected for a further 3 years under Article 3.5. I have a proposer in Bill Stoddart and Claire Swarbrick. And I have, Charles Neame's proposer is Claire Swarbrick and seconder is Steve Judd. And that Sarah Marie Williams is elected for a further 3 years under Article 3.5. And the proposer there is Bill Stoddart and the seconder Claire Swarbrick. And I've received 48 proxy votes in favour in advance of each candidate, and again 1 abstention. Will you please now vote for the re-election of those 3 council members or not? And you need to scroll right down to make sure that you cast 3 votes, please, 1 for each of the candidates. That's Stephen Judd, Charles Neame, and Sarah Marie Williams. I'll just give you a minute to vote. That'll take you a little bit longer than usual because there are 3 votes you need to cast. And as soon as we have the results, I will be able to tell you that, excellent, all 3 council members have been re-elected. So I'm delighted to say that Stephen Judd, Charles Neame and Sarah Marie Williams will be serving for a further 3 years, and that you have voted by an overwhelming majority. That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Now we have 2 candidates standing for trustees who are new candidates, and they are Jamie Richards, who is standing under Article 3.3, and Dr. Rebecca Collins. Their biographies or brief biographies have been posted on the website, but for those of you who haven't seen it, let me tell you just a little bit about each of them. Jamie is a chartered accountant and he's a chartered tax advisor, and he works with a private client tax specialist within one of the big 4 accounting firms. He is passionate about technology and digital transformation, and his financial acumen, digital innovation skills, boundless energy and creative thinking led him to being recognised as one of the 2020 e-private client top 35 under 35. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a heck of a title, and congratulations to Jamie for that. Jamie's always had a love of the great outdoors, and he enjoys spending as much time as he can in nature. He's a very keen gardener, he's an avid skier and a cyclist and a running enthusiast. But he's also the father of 2 young children, and it was this life-changing event that inspired him to become much more involved in the preservation and promotion of wildlife. And he began to recognise the critical importance of protecting our planet for future generations and ensuring that everybody has the opportunity to connect with nature. So Jamie Richards is putting himself forward for election as a council member. He's proposed by Bill Stoddart and he's seconded by Charles Neame, and I have 48 proxy votes received in advance, all in favour, and 1 abstention. Before I ask you to vote, let me first tell you about Dr. Rebecca Collins, because we will then ask you to vote for each of them at the same time. Rebecca grew up in Knutsford, where she returns regularly to see her family, and that's because she now lives on the Cheshire-Flintshire border. She's a university lecturer in human geography with research expertise in young people's environmental care, household environmental impacts through everyday consumption, and community sustainability initiatives, all highly relevant to what we do. In her teaching, she works closely with a range of private, public, and third sector organisations to provide sustainability-oriented project work and opportunities for her students. Her academic career emerged from her earlier experience working in environmental education and as a volunteer youth worker. She's very much looking forward to working with CWT on our youth and community engagement activities. When she's not teaching or researching, Rebecca is likely to be found walking in Cheshire or Flintshire, or trying to cram a few more plants into her garden, or from the look of it, kidnapping a local lamb. Or is that a lamb? I'm not sure that it is a lamb. It might be a, no, well, maybe she'll tell us when we finally meet her. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Her other creative hobbies include stone carving, life drawing, weaving, and I could go on. She's a very busy lady. She is proposed by Claire Swarbrick and she's seconded by John Roscoe. Again, I received proxy votes. There were 49, all in favour. So now, please, will you vote for these two new candidates as new trustees, for, against, abstain for Jamie Richards and Dr. Rebecca Collins. And again, I'll give you a moment just to gather your wits, press the buttons and see whether you are happy to elect those two as new members of council. Do we have a result yet? We've had new people just join us. So have we got a result? Yes, we have. And I'm delighted to be able to say that both Jamie Richards and Dr. Rebecca Collins have both been overwhelmingly rejected by, rejected, did I say? Good gracious me. What I meant to say was overwhelmingly accepted as new council members by your overwhelming majority of votes. Thank you very much indeed. And we look forward to meeting both Jamie and Rebecca in due course. Now, acknowledging the retirement of trustees does not always form part of our official business at the AGM, but it really would be remiss of us not to recognise the services of the people who work so hard for us when it comes to them standing down. So this year we have two very long-standing trustees coming to the end of their tenure and stepping down today, and a third who had to retire during the year. So let me tell you a little bit about them. Helen Carey, OBE DL, well known I'm sure to many of you, is stepping down after 7 years on council. During that time, Helen has served as Honorary Secretary, a member of the Valuing Nature Committee, a member of the Fundraising and Marketing Committee, and more recently as a member of the Management Support Group. Helen's involvement with and commitment to CWT goes way back to the 1960s, when her father was the chair of trustees. And Helen herself held another number of interesting positions, one of which included at one point running the trust shop from a drafty porter cabin. We've moved on since then. We don't do that to our volunteers anymore, but thank you for that, Helen. And during her more recent time on the board, Helen has helped guide the trust through a full review of its governance, which is really very important. So making sure that we are in good shape for the future. Helen's positivity, her enthusiasm for the trust work is infectious, and I know she's going to be sorely missed. Helen, thank you for all you have done for us. Professor Rob Mars is stepping down after 9 years on the council. And during that time, he served on the Conservation Committee and the Premises and Acquisitions Group. And Rob's professional background has brought a real scientific rigour to our many strategic and operational discussions. He's a strong advocate of evidence-based decision-making, and Rob has supported the evidence and planning team and wider nature recovery team in developing its thinking around nature reserve management and monitoring reserve management and monitoring and connecting the trust with science-based institutes and professional bodies. He has a forthright approach, and his Scottish sense of humour will be very much missed on the council. Rob, thank you so much for all that you have done for us over the past 9 years. And Sue Steer, she retired as a trustee in April 2021 after she'd served 4.5 years on council. She's having to leave, or she had to leave rather, due to moving away from Cheshire. Sue is a land agent by day, and she put these very useful skills to the good use of the Conservation Committee and the Premises and Acquisitions Group. And I'm delighted to say that Sue provided and continues to provide, albeit now at arm's length, valuable pro bono advice on all matters supporting the Trust in negotiating the best deals in purchase and leases and ensuring that we avoid any unnecessary liabilities. As I say, she continues to do that for us, even though she's had to step down as a trustee. So thank you so much, Sue, for all you've done and continue to do for us. The staff and the trustees of CWT want to say a huge thank you to the three of them. We have arranged for gifts to each of them. Of course, we can't present those to them tonight, but we will be presenting those gifts to them in due course. So thank you very much, Helen, Rob, and Sue. Well, that brings us really almost to the end of our formal part of our business. There is an opportunity, of course, for you to raise any other business. And if you would like to raise any other business, you can post a question on the Q&A. And I can see that there is a question posted on the Q&A. Let me just have a look at this. Oh, all right. It's on the Q&A, it says, many congratulations, Helen. I have very happy memories of working with you in the 1980s. And that's from a CIEEM assessor. Doesn't say who it is, but it's a very nice thing to have said. So thank you very much indeed for that. So if you do think of any questions or any other business that you'd like to raise, you have a few more minutes to think about it and post it on the Q&A, because we do have the opportunity to answer some of the questions that you've raised with us in advance. And I've got Charlotte Harris, our Chief Executive, standing by to do just that. Charlotte, would you like to come back and join me?
I'm here for this, T.
Excellent, good. So I have a question from a Mr. Cleage, who's asked, according to Charlotte Harris, 48,000 tonnes of CO2 were emitted from degraded peatland. How was this measured and how accurate is it?
Great question, thank you very much. So this figure was taken from a report commissioned by Cheshire East Council, which we completed in April 2021. So using best available evidence on the extent and condition of peat soils in the borough, we assessed each of the site against published peer-reviewed data on peatland carbon emissions. So we know that degraded peat, i.e. peatland which has been drained, cut over or cultivated, emits CO2, and the emission factors vary depending on the habitat type and its condition. So the figure of 48,000 tonnes of CO2 per year is a calculation of the total emissions arising from the peatland parcels in their various conditions in the borough. And we do have a full 54-page report on this with the methodology explained if you'd like to dig into that. And it's on the Mears and Mosses section of our website.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlotte. Well, our next question is from John Swain, and he says, beavers are all very well, but what are we doing about the badgers?
Another great question. So Cheshire Wildlife Trust has long been part of the National Wildlife Trust Badger campaign. So back in March 2021, we encouraged supporters to respond to the DEFRA consultation on the cull, and 39,000 people responded and 630 MPs were lobbied. We also submitted our own response opposing the cull and calling for a wider rollout of vaccinations in badgers and ultimately control of the disease in cattle. However, in September, we were saddened to learn that the government had issued new licences to cull badgers. So our focus remains on lobbying for a change in policy. And now the government has committed to expanding badger vaccination nationally as an alternative to culling, which is great news. But we will continue to apply pressure to the government to make sure that they produce and implement a viable strategy. We also continue to educate the public and policymakers and campaign against the issuing of further licences. and encourage farmers to take up vaccination. And you can expect to see another public facing campaign on this in the coming months.
Thank you, Charlotte. Mr. Honeyburn wants to know, why can't your wildlife magazine be posted in biodegradable envelopes like a number of other charities do, for instance, the National Trust?
Okay, so we currently post our magazines in FSC recycled paper envelopes that themselves are recyclable. Now, we know that people are generally used to recycling paper and that facilities are widely available and that councils all across Cheshire will collect paper for recycling. We did trial biodegradable potato starch wrap for our magazines 3 years ago. However, we found that some of the councils in Cheshire don't collect them in the green waste. So therefore it relies on you having a compost bin yourself for them to be biodegradable. Not everybody has that facility. We also found that it led to a lot of waste because they degrade quite quickly. And we had some complaints about magazines being ripped and contents being missing. So it's something we keep under review, but on balance at the moment, we feel that our paper envelopes are the most practical and sustainable solution.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Edwin Carter would like to know about the Saltersford Farm appeal. He wants to know what happens to the money if you fail to reach the target amount by the deadline.
Well, this question is almost a little bit out of date now. And I wish I could announce to you tonight that we've achieved the target. Well, we almost have. So when I checked just before coming on this call, 793 supporters have together donated £62,978, taking us to 94% of our total. And we still have another 19 days to run on the appeal. So I'm going to sit here tonight and say I'm very confident that we're going to achieve it, actually. So I don't really think we need to think about that contingency at the moment. We've got new donations arriving every day in the post and online. So I think we are going to get there. So thank you so much to everyone that's supported the campaign so far. We're really excited about this project and can't wait to get started on creating our new nature reserve.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And we have got one more question. It's from a Mr. Jeff Densham, and he says, while Chat Moss is in Lancashire and the adjacent Carrington Moss is in Cheshire, could CWT formally partner with LWT to help protect Carrington Moss from the proposed Greater Manchester Housing Plan, now known as Places for Everyone, which will mostly destroy, he says, this 10,000-year-old raised peat bog? He goes on a little bit further, and I'm sure we will, Mr. Densham, we will respond to you more fully after this AGM. It's an important question you raised. I don't know, Charlotte, whether you want to just give it a very initial quick response.
Sure, yeah, can do. Yeah, we work very closely with Lancashire Wildlife Trust on what we call the Manchester Mosses, which are all the peatland in that area, and we are working with Lancashire and Natural England at the moment that looking at how we can protect that landscape further in the future. We've also submitted a very detailed response to the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, which includes some of the detail of the housing targets that he references there. I think the response is on our website, but if not already, we can certainly put it up there so we can have a look at the response that we've made in detail.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope that answers your question fully. If not, please do come back to us and we will answer it in more detail. Well, that concludes the formal business of the AGM, and I declare the meeting, that part of the meeting closed, and at the time it is 49 minutes past 6. It brings us on to a new event, and that is a panel debate. We called it Wildlife. And the theme of it is, how can we achieve nature's recovery in Cheshire by 2030? You'll remember that last year at the AGM, we launched our 2030 strategy for Wilder Cheshire. And we set out an ambitious goal, which was that we should secure 30% of land for wildlife in great condition by 2030. So we're living in a nature and climate crisis, as we know. It means that we've got less than a decade to turn things around. This month, global leaders have been meeting at COP26 to finalise what we all hope will become ambitious targets, not only for climate, but for nature too. And the UK government is expected to announce a commitment to 30 by 30. but at what level and where will the detail be? That's, of course, we don't know yet. So over the past few weeks, we've been asking you to put forward your thoughts and questions on how we can achieve 30 by 30, at least in Cheshire. And we have tonight our own panel of experts with us. But first, to set the scene, we'd like to play you a very short film.
So this 30 by 30 mantra, 30% of land and sea being well managed and protected for nature by 2030, it's a key pillar now underpinning global nature recovery strategies. But what does it mean for Cheshire? Well, I want to show you by using this packet of Jaffa cakes. So we know from looking at maps that in Cheshire we've got 300,000 hectares of land. Now conveniently in a packet of Jaffa cakes there are 10 biscuits. So if you want to take 30% of Cheshire, it's equivalent to 3 Jaffa cakes. So I'm just going to take the 3 Jaffa cakes out. This is the amount of land that we need to be protected. I'll put all this land on this plate because obviously we don't want the bit without any nature on it, do we? Let's put these 3 Jaffa cakes on this plate. 30,000 hectares. Now what we do know from looking at our data is that of the land in Cheshire that we've currently got, about 60,000 hectares of that is semi-natural habitat. So we can turn 2 of these Jaffa cakes over. So we're already 2/3 of the way there to 30%. What we're looking for is this last 1/3 or this last Jaffa cake. So that's the land for nature, but is it protected and is it well managed? Well, again, we can look at our data and we know that of this semi-natural habitat that we've got here already, we know that about half of that is protected. So just about 30,000 hectares. So we've got 1/3 protected, we just need 2 Jaffa cakes more of land to be protected. Then the final thing is about, is it well managed? Well, if we take the last Jaffa cake, we know that about 5% of Cheshire is well managed. Now 5% of Cheshire is just about half a Jaffa cake. So we know that half a Jaffa cake is protected. What we're looking for is 3 Jaffa cakes. So hopefully we've been able to show from using these Jaffa cakes, we just need 1 Jaffa cake more of semi-natural habitat, 2 Jaffa cakes more protected, 2.5 more well managed, and then we'll hit the 30 by 30 target. But even when we've got those figures, what about what sort of habitat is it that we're going to create? Well, if we look at what's typical in Cheshire, we can say it's woodland, like we've got here, or it's wetland, or it's grassland. Those are sort of the 3 predominant habitats. So if we were to use those as the sorts of habitats that we want, we could say we want a doubling of woodland and a doubling of wetland, and then 10,000 hectares of grassland. And that would give us the figures that we need. And it's not, of course, it's not just about habitats on land, it's about habitats at sea as well. So in Cheshire, we have an area of coast around the Dee estuary and the Mersey estuary, and we need to think about those and what nature recovery looks like for our seas. Remember, it's not just about creating the habitat, we also need to make sure that we get the wildlife back into those spaces. We need to think about what wildlife should be in Cheshire and how do we get it to come back. So that's it. That's the 30 by 30 challenge. How do we get 30% of Cheshire good for nature, protected and well managed? How do we get double the woodland? How do we get double the wetland? How do we restore the peatland? How do we get thousands of hectares of grassland? It's going to be a big challenge, but Cheshire Wildlife Trust is up to that challenge. The thing is, we're not going to be able to do it by ourselves. We're going to need other people to help. We're going to be needing landowners, local authorities, individuals, community groups. We need everyone to get on board with this challenge. So my question to you is, are you up for that challenge? Are you up for helping us to achieve this nature's recovery in the next decade? If you are, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your ideas, and we want to know how you can help us and how we can help you.
So there you are.
So there you are.
That's am I back? Yes, there you are. So that's the challenge. And Martin Varley, who made that film, is one of our panel members tonight. Let me introduce you to the others. We have with us John Roscoe, who is a trustee of Cheshire Wildlife Trust and a business consultant working with some of the UK's leading companies. We have, as you've heard, Martin, who's our Director of Nature Recovery, and of course the great beaver believer extraordinary and creative thinker. That's how he's described by his colleagues, and I know it to be true. We also have with us Anna Maria White. Anna is a campaigner, a volunteer, and a wildlife conservation student. And we have Pippa Johnson, who is CWT's ponds officer. She's rather more than that. She's a very busy farmer. She and her husband run a very big farm in Cheshire. And she's also in the middle of writing a PhD on agricultural land use and its relationship to conservation and biodiversity and the need for reform. I don't know where she gets all the time from, but she's certainly a really useful person to have on board. So that's our panel tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to take our first question, which has been sent to us in advance. And it's really about the development of human pressures on the environment. And it comes from Ian Johnson. And he says, with UK populations ever increasing and the demand for housing increasing even faster, how are we going to successfully ensure we protect nature and the environment? It's a great question. John, would you like to lead us off with your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the question, Ian. I hope everybody can hear me fine. It's always worth checking on a Zoom call. I'm a father of three. I'm acutely aware of the housing challenge, and I'm also obviously involved in conservation, and I see what's happening to nature. And we've just seen a number of videos tonight. And I think the country has been failing to resolve this problem for quite a long time. And it's now reaching, instead of it getting gradually worse, it's reached a tipping point. And for me, from my business experience, that creates a crisis, and a crisis creates opportunity. And I think what needs to happen now is we have to meet people's needs with a fully joined up plan. People want homes, and a few years ago, they may have just prioritized that, but now they want homes that are sustainable because they're cheaper to heat and cheaper to look after. They want homes that are part of a community, and they want homes that are surrounded by a rich biodiversity of nature more than ever before. At the same time, interestingly, they don't want as much space for offices as they used to, and they don't want as much space for shops and retail as they used to before. So I think this is an unprecedented opportunity to get things right, and we need two things. One, I think the government policy has to change to navigate more clearly through this challenge. It needs to incentivize sustainable housing, and it needs to incentivize and be open to change of use of property. And secondly, I think the building sector needs to take more corporate accountability for growing their businesses sustainably. I think a large part of the solution ultimately will be to repurpose and change the use of unused retail space and unused office space, just in the same way that a lot of the 19th century legacy mills in some of the mill towns have changed over time to be used for housing. And that housing needs to be sustainable. So I actually think the two things which were in conflict before are getting closer and closer into being the same set of consumer needs. People want sustainable housing, they want rich nature, and I think it's down to government and the big housing companies to think about the things they don't want anymore, like retail and office space, and find what can be, I think, a great and exciting solution.
But at present, of course, we still have conflict. I mean, that last question was a case in point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Carrington Moss, a very, very ancient peatland, and for goodness sake, we need peatlands because of their carbon capture sinks. And yet it's the subject apparently of this new housing proposal from Greater Manchester. I must admit, I wasn't aware of that, but if that's so, that's really, I would have thought, pretty serious. Anna, can I bring you in here? How do you view this, and how do we finesse this problem of, on the one hand, we do need more housing, but on the other hand, We don't need them to put it on peat mosses.
No, this is really true, because obviously we need the peat mosses, really important, as you said. The problem is that we do have lots of these existing structures, but they're not being used or utilised in the correct way. And a lot of spaces are being left to be derelict or just, left by the wayside. They're not being used properly. And obviously with the pandemic, that sort of accelerated that spaces that were just being left open. But when it comes to housing, as we've always had this issue where there's not enough, seemingly never enough, and it's never affordable, and it's never best placed in terms of building materials. It's never sustainable. So I think it really is a challenge now going forward to use what we already have that's existing, and to also bring in more sustainable avenues of the way that we build, the way that we are able to give housing for people. It should be for the long term, but it should also, maybe we're looking at houses that perhaps go up, but they can also come down and don't interfere with nature or interfere with people in the same way that maybe blocks and blocks of flats do. So there's a lot of different aspects between the well-being of people living in these houses, or high rises, whatever the case might be. But then, it's having that connection again with nature. And I think some of that can come through with sustainable building materials.
Thank you, Anna. Martin, can I bring you in here? Because I can foresee that we are ultimately going to face the possibility of conflict between the needs of nature and the needs of housing. For all that John and Anna have just said, I mean, they're talking ideals in some way. The reality is we have these planning applications going ahead now.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention conflict, Felicity, because the analogy I was thinking about was of a playground. If you imagine the countryside or the land is like a playground, for years, the developers or the house builders have been the bully in the playground, and nature has been the small, weak child that can't defend itself. What we're trying to move towards now is a situation where nature can stand up to the assaults of the developing world. We need to increase the value of nature, and we're beginning to see that now. So you maybe have seen in the news, we've had the Environment Act just be passed in the last couple of days. Now, this is the government's flagship policy, which is going to build back greener, and it's going to create a countryside which is better for the future generations. And in it, there are a number of strong policy things. We have these local nature strategies, we have species conservation strategies, we have protected site strategies, we have the strengthened biodiversity duty on public bodies, we have an Office for Environment Protection. These all provide muscles for nature to fight back against the imposition of other areas which would like to take over that land, like development. So we need to see how that plays out. But ultimately, the answer to this question lies in investment. So systematically, we've undervalued nature for decades. And now our chickens are coming home to roost. So in October, the Green Finance Institute estimated that we need to invest £56 billion above the current public sector commitments to recover nature in the next 10 years. That's the level of underinvestment, whereas all these other sectors have been having this investment. So how close we come to that level of investment in the nature will dictate the success of our efforts to protect nature and the environment in the future. So watch this space.
Well, thank you for that. Can we bring in Pippa? Pippa, what is your view? You live in the countryside, and you're not immune to these pressures either. Local people in the countryside are forever being driven off the land, are they not? Because there isn't enough places, there aren't enough places for them to live. Are we going to see more and more agricultural land taken for housing?
I mean, that is a possibility at the moment. At the moment, we are protecting the green belt, which is where there is a significant proportion of agricultural land. And I think it is important to continue protection of the green belt. This stops city sprawl and allows for there to be space between large cities and allows for spaces for wildlife as well.
Okay, well, that's you brought up a question that really leads me into the next question, and that is, how are we going to tackle this 30-30 challenge? We have two questions on that, one from John Clark, and one from Norman Sadler. John Clark asks, how will CWT promote biodiversity in practical terms and prevent habitat loss, which speaks to your point? And what is planned, says Norman Sadler, within the next 9 years? Nature cannot wait. Now, who'd like to take this first? Perhaps Martin, you ought to lead on this one.
Yeah, I think it's quite addressed at Cheshire Wildlife Trust, and perhaps others can come in with their own thoughts. But you know, this 30 by 30 challenge, it's not ours alone, it's everybody's. And I think the thing that we've got to realise is the scale of this challenge. I mean, you can see from the film that we are talking about a scale of recovery that is beyond the capabilities of our trust. So I did a little calculation before this webinar. We've said in that video, we've got maybe 30,000 hectares of new land. It sounds very easy to say, but if we were to buy this land in Cheshire at the moment, you know, we said, we'll do all of this, we'll buy 25,000 hectares. That would cost us over £700 million at the current land values. And as an indicator, that would take us 250 years to achieve at our current income levels if we did nothing else apart from buy land. So that gives you the scale of what's at stake here. We can't possibly do this by ourselves. Now, that's not to say that we won't be doing anything. Norman asked, what are we going to do over the next 9 years? We will be working as hard as we can to try and bite into that 25,000 hectares. So we're going to be planting 1,000 hectares of woodland. We're going to be creating 150 hectares of meadows. We're going to be creating 100 hectares of wetlands. This is a rate of work which we've not seen in the history of our trust. But that is just a drop of the ocean. What's more importantly is we want others to be helping us to bridge that nature gap. So we will be working with others in ways that we haven't seen before. And I think you can expect us to be working with a range of new partners in ways that we can't imagine if we're going to achieve this target, things that we can't even see because we've never had them before.
So Pippa, does that start to address some of your concerns?
Yes, I think it does. I think, you know, we are going to have to partner up as a wildlife trust with other landowners in order to deliver 30 by 30. You know, that is the only way to get the critical mass of land that is required.
But what about the role of the individual citizen? And Anna Maria, you're a campaigner. You're you know, in a sense, you have that sort of point of view of campaigning on by individuals. Can the ordinary individual in Cheshire make a difference?
Absolutely. I mean, it's little things that you can do that empower you to be able to do, you know, just a little something that might just help. It's a collective ability that we need to come together and be able to keep going forwards. And I think through campaigning and being, you know, local, really, even where I am, I know that a lot of the residents are very careful about things like litter, things like that, just that very simple things to keep an eye on, but, you know, like that, or just things that they want to do within their own communities. And even if you don't feel that you necessarily have that much engagement with your community, there are little things you can do at home, and sometimes it's, you know, where you put your money, or where you want to you know, think about how you can do things differently. So perhaps you don't need another, you know, whatever it might be, because you've actually got 3 and you've forgotten about it. So, you know, utilizing what you've actually got already at home, and sometimes, you know, helps you to feel like you can live a more sustainable life. And you might think, well, what does, you know, me using a different type of sponge or a different type of, you know, non-plastic bottle is going to make a difference? Well, it does, even though it's a small impact and it's only impacting you or some of your family members. But then, you know, it's communicating those ideas, and that it moves outwards. It goes from you to your family, and to your family to your friends. And, you know, there are small ways that you can help contribute to actually building this bigger picture that we're all trying to work really hard towards. And even starting with a little, you know, a pot of flowers or something that gives a bee that happens to be passing by the opportunity to stop and, you know, take in a bit of water and take in some pollen before flying off on its journey. You know, everyone can do something, and it can be such a small gesture, but it can actually make a huge impact. So I think it really comes down to individual responsibilities and what you're willing to do. And there are lots of things you can do.
Well, that's an inspiring thought. John, what about at the other end of the spectrum, the impact of major industries? I mean, Cheshire has a lot of major, big industrial farms, particularly, and many of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are owned by corporate entities and have shareholders who've probably never been to Cheshire and have no interest in Cheshire, but they are, of course, using an enormous swathe of land in Cheshire, which is actually not really accessible to wildlife anymore in many respects. How do we go about influencing that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's huge people power, and bringing that to bear can drive dramatic and very rapid change. I'm sure we've all seen it when industries and brands and companies have got things wrong and they've missed what consumers want. Our role as consumers is to make sure we're really, really clear. And we can do that in some of the ways that Anna Marie has already said, with our money. So choosing products, if we're shareholders, by voting, by writing, by using social media. Never in the history of humanity, if I think about it, have individuals had as much power to influence other people as we have today. So the first thing is going to be, okay, 30 by 30, do I care about it? Really think about it. And if you do care about it, and I think probably everyone here does care about it, then you have to go, so what am I going to do about it? And the power that you've got as a consumer is absolutely enormous. So find out who those people are, and contact them. The flip side to that, of course, is what's big business doing? Well, when I first started in my sort of business career 25-ish years ago, we would always talk about how do we make our business sustainable? And what it meant then was very simply profit and loss. How do you make sure you make more money than the future? And now the conversations that need to be happening and are happening in a lot of companies and boardrooms are how do I make my business more sustainable in the broad understanding of what that word means. It means financially and from an environmental point of view, because put very simply, if those businesses that own large parts of Cheshire are resulting in ecological and environmental destruction, which is making people unhappier and less productive, then in a very blunt financial way, they're losing. And I think that change is happening in boardrooms, but it needs to happen much more.
Thank you. Martin, you wanted to come back in there.
Yeah, Felicity, I was just going back to Norman's question about what is planned within the next 9 years, and you know, the uncertainty and the excitement of the future, that there's going to be things that we can't think about today that we're going to be doing. I'd be interested to hear from those who are on this webinar what they think that we should be doing over the next 9 years. The idea that we currently have all the answers, I think, is a bit naive, and I would be interested to see what ideas are out there in the audience. So if you've got some thoughts, put it in the chat, put it in the questions and answers, and perhaps we can come back to it a bit later on.
Thank you very much indeed for that suggestion. And yes, do put it on the Q&A, and maybe if we have time later, we will come back to it. But even if we don't have time on this webinar, then certainly the Trust will come back to you. We'll answer you all the questions and all the points you raised, and be very grateful for them. Let's move on to the next question, which is about nature recovery networks and the landscape scale, the idea of scale approach. This is a question from Michael Willis. He says, how are the Lawson principles, which means bigger, better, more joined up, how are the Lawson principles being applied to the Trust's approach to net biodiversity gain in Cheshire? I wonder, Martin, I'm going to start with you again, if I may.
Yeah, thanks, Felicity. I mean, this is quite a complicated question, and I'm just for those that are listening that maybe aren't sure what this question is getting at. In 2010, John Lawton came up with this white paper for the government, and in that paper he suggested that what we really needed to do for nature was have bigger, better, more joined up habitats if nature was going to recover. Now those principles are sort of been the established way of working, certainly for Wildlife Trust, is that everybody knows what the Lawton principles are, and you know, we all work towards them. Currently, what we've got coming along is this thing called biodiversity net gain, which is the idea that if a development damages nature during its implementation, then that should be repaid somewhere else in the landscape. So we have opportunities to create new spaces for nature as a result of development. And so what we would try and do is that we already work on what we call living landscapes. So we sort of have priority areas, and we work with farmers, and we work with communities in that space to make sure that the work that we do is connected up.
And regarding the biodiversity net gain, what we would try and do is target the biodiversity net gain to the places that we're already working. So with the example of Saltersford Farm, which you're aware of, we are trying to bring in biodiversity net gain to help with that site. Now that site lies in the Swettenham Valley. It's one next to one of our nature reserves. There's a connection between our existing sites, between the sites that we're trying to increase pollinators on. So that's an example of where we're trying to direct biodiversity net gain to where we're already working and to where we want to work in the future.
And Pippa, are there opportunities to in your work for the trust around ponds?
Yes, so I currently work as a district level licensing ponds officer, which essentially means that I create ponds within the Cheshire East region to offset habitat lost in other areas. So I'm currently working with a number of farmers and landowners to put these ponds in and develop habitats primarily for great crested newts, but obviously the habitat creation can go wider than that.
There's a very interesting, I don't know whether you saw it yesterday, but a very interesting article on the Chinese, a Chinese professor who is starting to develop these sponge cities, the idea that you can alleviate flooding and deal with flooding by allowing the waters to do what water should do naturally. In other words, go around bends and create ponds. So should we also be thinking about trying to influence conurbations in Cheshire, so towns and have we got a city? Yes, we've got Chester, to have more water spaces within those urban conurbations too. Pippa.
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself then. So within the district level licensing, we work largely within the rural area. This is where generally habitats of great crested newts are found. But it is definitely a potential to encourage other wildlife which requires water. And we have seen other examples, haven't we? For example, putting grasses on top of roofs in cities to make green spaces and areas for wildlife. So, you know, we've done it with grasses, why not with water?
Oh, how about that, John? Do you think some of the developers that might bite on that one?
I mean, I think it's a brilliant question. I fundamentally believe in the principle, and what I was going to say, I was trying to think about the water example, and I was imagining that we invest all this effort in making this river and stream beautiful further upstream, only to find that it gets polluted further down before it reaches the sea. It has to be more joined up. As a trustee in the trust, we've been looking at land acquisition, and I have to say, I've been absolutely delighted to see that one of the biggest questions we always have is how does it link to other land that we already have an agreement to look after, or that we can see someone is looking after, because we need that scale, and it's fundamentally part of our acquisition strategy. There's something Martin said earlier as well, which is around partnering. And I think Charlotte and the team have been doing some brilliant partnering with other organisations, and I think it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, why is there not a joint council of the Forestry Commission, the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust, the RSPB, all the local organisations that says, right, what is our plan? And I think the rallying call of 3030, having that goal, creates that possibility, and it will happen more and more and more. And that's really exciting, because it's a very different approach from, you know, an approach of just a few years ago, which might be to protect a specific field or meadow over there. And it's at the very core of what we're doing from land acquisition, but there's even more we can do with partnerships, as Martin was saying earlier.
And we do have fantastic partnerships, but including with now Grosvenor and the Chumley estate, which is
right.
really potentially exciting, isn't it? Because they are huge landowners.
And perhaps 1,000 partnerships with our members. You know, if we think about it that way, with everything that we touch and own, with the schools that our members' children or they work out or their children go to, the playing fields that we use, the possibility is enormous, but it requires us all to sort of figure out how to do it.
And I do wonder, both you and Anna Maria have talked about individual responsibility, and that the individual these days can make a huge difference. Well, clearly, you know, influencing on social media is one way, but sometimes people are not entirely clear on how they should go about that. Is there a role here, do you think, for CWT to give people templates, to give people suggestions of here's a way which you could make a difference very simply by dropping a line to this person, or putting a post on social media, a blog on social media, or somewhere else? Martin, do you have any view on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we've got to do for this team. I mean, I think in the olden days we thought we can do all this by ourselves. Now what we recognise is that the scale of the problem is such that we can't do it all by ourselves. So what we tend to do now is we do some by ourselves. We also try and talk directly to others, and maybe they will do it by themselves. But we're also trying to do it much more diffusely, like as you say, giving out suggestions, trying to work with individuals or influencers who can then spread that news within their own community, or on social media or whatever, or with toolkits, or with suggestions, or with videos or whatever. That hopefully there will be people who we don't know that have done things because maybe they've heard about something we've done, or they've seen a video, or they've seen a post, and actually we're not even going to know what they've done. To get the number of people that we need to mobilize in order to make the change, which is going to deliver this 30 by 30, it's going to be outside of what we're used to in the past.
Okay, let's move on to the theme of nature versus agriculture. We've kind of skirted around it a little bit already. We've talked about it to some extent, but we've got two questions. One from Jacqueline Carter, and in a sense we've already started to answer this. But how can Cheshire Wildlife Trust work with farmers in the county to work towards a more sustainable agriculture? In other words, reduce high nitrate pollutions in our area. So she's asking a very specific question there. We've started to answer it. We have got these partnerships, but how can we influence the farming community? And I'm going to ask Pippa in a moment. But let's take also another question, which is relevant, from Catherine West. How can we ensure people can still make a living from the land, while at the same time using practices that better conserve and maintain the health of the land, livestock and animals? Now, I know this is something very close to Pippa Johnson's heart. And of all the people on the panel, she's best qualified to answer because she has a large farm with livestock. Pippa.
Thank you very much. So I think it's worth noting that 72% of land in the UK is covered by utilised agricultural area. And I just want to share a quote that Philip Lowe and others in their book Moralising the Environment gives, and it's an excellent illustration. He says, imagine the scene. A gentle river runs between small dairy farms tucked into the folds of a quiet Devon valley. The water is foaming, there is a stench of ammonia in the air, and dead fish float on the surface. Someone's slurry store has overflowed. This beautiful countryside has been desecrated. Its natural waters have been polluted and its wildlife has suffered. The farmer responsible could be prosecuted, and if so, may face a heavy fine. But he too feels he is a victim. Persistent rain led to the overflow, and if the rain continues, it will eventually cleanse the river. After all, specialised dairy farming has for more than a century shaped and maintained the countryside in these parts. Of course, it has had to modernise and intensify to stay in business, but government has encouraged it to do so, and the public take for granted the ready supply of milk produced. It's worth noting that agriculture contributes to GDP £10.4 billion in 2019. And there is some good news from agriculture. Since the late 1990s, nitrate and phosphate application rates have fallen, and between 2000 and 2018, it was estimated that nitrous oxide emissions have fallen by 12% and methane emissions have decreased by 11%. There have also been the introduction of the nitrate pollution prevention regulations, with the latest iteration being in 2015. Nitrates also forms part of the statutory management requirements which sit under cross-compliance, which farmers must comply with in order to gain their basic payment. However, there are still areas of concern. The Farmland Bird Index continues to demonstrate decline. At present, there is a decline in the level of environmental agreements of 12% from 2016 to 2019. Although when analysing previous agreements, Brian Jack highlights that this has been a developing process, and he looks back as far as the first environmental agreements. The nature of payments is set to change. We are looking at the removal of the basic payment under cross-compliance, and the countryside stewardship scheme is likely to be phased out in the near future in favour of environmental land management agreements. I think it's safe to say it's a complex problem and one which requires significant work, not just from the farming community, but also from industry, the government and consumers, so that we all can play our part in taking nature forward. And I think there is a willingness from the farming community to engage and to develop their ecology on their farms.
But does the government need to play a much bigger role in understanding that farmers do need support to change these basic farming practices of reliance on artificial fertilizers, artificial pesticides?
Yeah, I think the government does need to play a greater role. I mean, there was a study by Lynchwood and Williamson who stated that when looking at SMEs, so small medium enterprises, if you offered support, you were more likely to get a small medium enterprise to be more environmentally friendly. So I think it's up to the government to ensure that there is the right regulation, the right environmental agreements out there, and the right support so that those agreements can be accessed and best utilised to achieve the most for conservation and biodiversity.
Thank you. John, can I bring you in here? Because there's a heavy accent on fining people, the polluter pays. So you fine farmers for allowing slurry to go into the watercourses. You fine, theoretically at any rate, you fine the water companies for allowing untreated sewage to flow into the rivers and out to sea. But at the end of the day, it's all very well fining people, but what we want is for it to stop, because those fines don't bring back the animals and the bird life and the invertebrates that we've lost as a result of all these incidents, do they?
No, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And, it's great to get Pippa's perspective, because it is very easy to do. I don't know if you call it farmer bashing or something like that, but it's very easy to highlight the problem and blame the people. When at the end of the day, as consumers, we're all ultimately responsible for where our money goes. I'm going to speak, this is my personal view and personal capacity here. I'm really frustrated by the fact that there isn't a very clear way for us as consumers to have an impact in what we buy and when we go into the shops. And I've got a couple of examples to illustrate. I've worked on Guinness and Johnny Walker brands. These are fantastic brands that people love and they admire for whatever reason, and therefore they pay a premium for them. I can think of fair trade, when the original problem started to be highlighted about people in often remote countries, often to do with coffee or chocolate, weren't being paid a fair price. The brand fair trade was created and people started to buy fair trade. We've had a red tractor logo created for various reasons to do with animal welfare and things like that in this country. I don't think we've done a good enough job yet of finding a way of explaining to the consumer at point of purchase which products are better for the environment and which ones they should buy. And I think that's partly a government legislation challenge in terms of a carrot, but partly a consumer branding challenge. And I think it would be amazing if the environmental organisations were able to work together to come up with something which is better than what we've got at the moment, whether that's red tractor or organic or fair trade, which is something which people go, do you know what, I want something which recognises the work that farmers have done for, and it could be RSPB and RSPCA, or everybody's got out there with a different message, and nothing is cutting through. The problem can be enormously helped, I think, with a carrot for farmers to do the right thing for 85% of the land, as we were hearing before, if we are encouraging and making it easier for consumers to make informed choices. Not everybody can pay a premium, that's not what I'm talking about, but everyone can make a choice at the point of purchase. And I think we've got to find a way of making it easier. So I don't have all the answers, but I know it's possible. And this challenge has to make us find that answer and make it work, because farmers need to be rewarded for doing the right things, not just bashed when it goes wrong.
Anna Maria, would you sympathise with that view?
I do highly, because I don't know necessarily how it works for farmers or necessarily the legislation, but I know that there needs to be a lot more support from government in order not just to create incentives for people to do things so we can have behaviour change. And I'm not just talking about, you know, farming and the way that their practices are. You know, it's not about demonising anyone. It's about saying, look, we have a problem here. We need to solve it. And we need to work on those issues together so that it's better for everyone. And, you know, basically the only way to talk about going forwards in terms of like a socio-economic kind of reform, in a way, we need to think about things about how it can be sustainable. And what I think we're really, especially we've talked to COP a lot this week about the fact that this is the time now for innovation. And a lot of, you know, money can be put in and invested, because it's an exciting time to look at things that we need to solve. We don't have to look at it in just the negative perspective. We know what the negatives are. We need to try and move forward to find a better way of working, communicating those messages, and actually being able to deliver, which is more important than just promising something or pledging something, that we're actually going to get there. And that takes many different people, many departments and many teams of people to make that happen. And we can't expect consumers to know everything. And if we give them mixed messaging, then of course, then they're just back to square one. So I think we need a clearer message overall, and we need clearer funding, especially, and support the farmers who are, you know, doing an incredible job against all, you know, kind of difficult situations a lot of the time.
Well, let's ask the farmer in question, Pippa.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what Anna Maria said. And I think as well, it's about looking back and seeing what we can learn from history. Because although, yes, there have been damaging farming activities, there are also positives. For example, you can look back to things like the Norfolk 4 crop rotation, which predates any chemical fertilizer, and actually proved to be quite a good way of managing agricultural land. Now, I'm not saying that agriculture can go back to, you know, a true Norfolk 4 crop, but it is a way, a mixed farming approach is a way to help manage concerns around the environment, and can help, especially with things like soil health.
I wonder, though, if there's also another elephant in the room, and that is, isn't it a fact that we have got used to food being very cheap in this country? Milk particularly, and you have a dairy herd. Milk is extremely cheap, and I wonder whether part of what we have to do, and this, of course, it's easy for me to say this, or any of us who, you know, have reasonable incomes to say it. It's not easy if you are really on the breadline. But how do we get fairer prices for agricultural products at the same time as ensuring that children don't go hungry?
I mean, we did have, if we look back into history, we had the Milk Marketing Board, specifically for milk. So farmers would sell all their milk to the Milk Marketing Board, and the Milk Marketing Board would then sell it on and would achieve a fair price for the farmer. The Milk Marketing Board obviously having a much bigger scope to negotiate with large companies, which individual farmers don't always have the ability to do. And I think it is about ensuring that farmers are paid a fair price for their produce, to ensure that that money can also be then, money they make from their produce can also be used to carry out environmental good.
Thank you for that. I'd just like to bring in a question which really we've almost covered, but I think maybe Anna particularly would like to say perhaps a few more words. And it's from Lynn Lomax. She says, what is the most important thing we can do as individuals to help nature's recovery?
And one of the best ways to start is, you know, join your local trust. And for me, it was joining Cheshire Trust, the Cheshire Wildlife Trust, because I didn't feel, I just moved into the area and I didn't know anyone, and then the pandemic hit. So of course I didn't know how to engage with anybody necessarily around me. And becoming a member was actually really useful because, I'm kept in the loop, I'm always updated. And, it just gave me a way to think about how I can contribute myself to, something much bigger than myself, and also help other people. And a lot of that has come mostly from communicating, the things that we do when we go out to events and we meet people. And I think those small interactions can make, that longer living impact later on with people. And it's about, just for me, communicating those ideas, which I think is really important. So I just say it's been wonderful as a volunteer. Volunteer your time if you want to meet people and you want to find other people who might feel the same way or not have the, maybe network, let's say, of people that they can go to. I think it's a really good place to start in being a member. And I'm sure a lot of members are here tonight, which is great. But, just finding smaller ways to engage with other people who might be like-minded, I think is a really good start.
Absolutely. I wonder also, there's a question that's just popped up on the chat function, which I might just bring in here, if I may, because it speaks to individual effort, and it's from I'm not quite sure who it's from, but it says, with the increasing wet weather, it could be helpful if CWT could provide some guidance on how individual gardeners could redesign their spaces to support wildlife. I seem to recall that somebody said that, if we put all our gardens together, we'd have an enormous area for wildlife. Martin, can you guide us on this?
Yeah, well, they estimate, I think, the area of gardens in the UK is something like nearly 500,000 hectares, which is a significant portion. So what we do with our gardens is really important. And certainly if you're finding that your garden is wetter, then the thing to do is to put a pond in if you can. I mean, I've got 2 in our back garden, and what you find is that the water level drops in other parts of the garden. So that does address some of the water issue, and it also allows new species to come in and a different diversity of wildlife that you've got. But also talking about gardens on the subject of what individuals can do, I mean, I think you need to do what you can where you are. So one example that I did this summer, I mean, I live in quite an ordinary house on an ordinary estate. My garden is the size of a drive, and I just scattered some wildflower seeds in my front garden. And it was terribly messy, and it wasn't green and manicured. So I got some strange looks from the neighbours. So what I did was I put up a small plaque saying, this garden is part of Cheshire Wildlife Trust Pollinating Cheshire campaign to increase the diversity of wildlife. And if you're interested, go to this website. And just putting that plaque up, I watched so many people go past, and they stopped and they looked. What I really wanted was for them to knock on my door and say, how do I get one of these in my garden? But even what little space you've got, you can have an impact. So it's just giving a thought about how can I make this more for wildlife.
We have an enormous bug bank, but I can't persuade my husband to stop mowing the lawn. But yes, it's a very good idea. Thank you for that. It's also, of course, for anybody who hates mowing the lawn, an obvious solution, isn't it? Finance. Let's go on to finance. Jane Parry asks, how can the finance that we need really to fund so much of what we've talked about so far, how can that be raised? Anybody like to tackle that, John?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was just going to add actually one thing on the last thing as well. In addition to the pond and things, for me, the simplest thing is to buy less and buy better. Actually almost are not doing stuff because we're using too much stuff. But onto finance anyway. So I heard on the radio the other day, someone said, do you realize if greenhouse gases smelt like sewage, the fines that would be introduced would have a very quick impact on greenhouse gases. And of course, weirdly, they're arguably more dangerous than the smell of sewage, right? So into finance, I think for sure there has to be a big legislative change that does have that combination of carrot and stick. So it punishes unnecessary damage and damage to the environment much more than we have done previously. and it's almost like when you play Monopoly, you know, and you take that money and then you put it into a fund that then you get the chance of winning back. So I think we need legislative change to get more serious about this whole area than we are right now. And I think we also need the carrot. So at the moment, we almost haven't figured out how to make environmental sustainability commercially sustainable. And that has to happen through a combination of legislation and then smart organizations finding smart ways of doing things with the money created. I mean, I think, again, one of the examples that's often analysed is the carrier bag charge. You know, in terms of driving habit change, it didn't necessarily deliver everything that was expected, but it shows that what can happen with a very small initially change that then affects millions of people. And I think in the case of finance, with the move towards net biodiversity net gain and carbon sequestration, there is a huge opportunity for the government to introduce all kinds of different legislation around the charges for carbon, creating the possibility for people like us and farmers to earn more money through biodiversity net gain and carbon sequestration on their land to incentivize that habit change and reward it. And I still come back to, we need something that allows people to pay for their everyday items in a way that has an impact on sustainability. Whether that's an improved version of Red Tractor or something new, I don't know. But we need to find new ways to get finance flying into this area. And I know that the trust, obviously, it can't all come from volunteer donations, you know, that we all put in. So I know the trust, we've been doing campaigns, and we're also looking at what finance is available through things like carbon sequestration to make land purchases affordable again, like the Saltersford Farm example. So for me, it's a combination of all of these things, but most importantly, we're going to need some big legislative change so that we can actually penalise and reward the right behaviour and the wrong behaviour the other way around.
Anna Maria, your views on that?
Yes, I think I completely agree actually with John in that, you know, we have these like holes in the puzzle really that we need to sort of find an answer to, and we need to do it now. So finding those innovations are going to be really key to that. And I think there's going to probably be, not necessarily within the trust, but, you know, in general, talking about sustainability and making it economical for everyone, and actually to reward people where they're actually doing good. And it's often, it is the small businesses that are really pushing ahead. So, you know, if the small businesses can do it, there's no excuse for the large businesses not to do it. They're just holding back on doing it because of monetary profits, you know. So we understand that there's a level that they have to, if we can make it attractive to them in order to switch, and it might be a really simple switch, it might be something, you know, switching one thing for another that is much more beneficial to nature and wildlife, but also, you know, having finance investment in terms of innovative designs, innovative kind of ideas, that's really attractive to private investment as well. So you never know what might suddenly appear really as a result of talking about these new innovations, and you know, finance should hopefully arrive because there's new opportunities.
And what about individuals influencing or trying to influence, not just politicians? I mean, we're getting quite expert, well, not expert, but we're getting reasonably good at that. We know how to do that, and we can guide members on how to do that if they so wish. But what about influencing some of these big companies? There's been quite a lot in the press recently about, and somebody I think has raised it on the chat, about the amount of raw sewage being discharged by the water companies. Now they're saying, oh, we can't get the chemicals to treat it because, you know there's a global supply shortage and so on and so forth, or we've had so much rain we can't control it and so forth. But yeah, the fact of the matter is we've had phenomenal amounts of sewage going into the water courses, reversing an awful lot of the excellent work that's been done over the years. And at first, the government seemed to be on their side and simply saying, well, that's okay then, if you can't get the chemicals, don't worry for a while. Until there was actually quite a big outcry, a big campaign, which has forced them to backtrack. Now, is it enough to just lobby governments, or should individuals be encouraged and guided by organisations like the Wildlife Trust to start turning their attentions to the big polluters, the water companies who are guilty? Anna?
Absolutely. Well, I actually campaigned against the sewage issues, and I also wrote to my MP, and I also wrote to the government. So there are lots of ways that simply putting your name to something is a statement of intent. You don't like these things happening. Nobody wants these things to happen, but yet they're slipping under the radar. And unfortunately, because we don't know about it, we are allowing it by default. And we don't want for this to happen, because there are so many people putting in, concerted efforts in order to try and save nature all around, no matter if it's local or other areas of the coastline. We need to protect that. And if we can't stop it at the source, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, and it will just keep filtering out. There's no point in trying to save something by the ocean, which we need to do because the ocean is so important. We need to keep our biodiversity, but if we can't stop pollution going into that, it knocks the other effects out, really, doesn't it? If all this hard work that people are doing only for one thing to really put, be the thorn in the side of the rose. So, I think we really have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and, just make your voice heard. And it doesn't matter if it's an email or if it's just adding your name to a petition. If it's something that bothers you or irks you, you should do something, feel compelled to do something. And it's a little thing, but all those people add up, and it's hundreds of thousands of people that said, look, we're not going to agree for this anymore, and you need to do something about it. You're the government. So it's really important. And lots of other charities are also pushing for, stopping sewage. So you just have to do what you can. But I think it's a really good way to have your voice heard and your opinions heard. Write to your MP. It's always a start. And once they're on side, keep at it. You've got to keep at it all the time.
Martin, is this something that the trust needs to take on board, that, yes, we're doing it, we're helping our members to make their voices heard, but do we need to widen our target areas?
Well, we already do a lot of work with farmers. Diffuse pollution is quite a problem in Cheshire, so we are working a lot with farmers. I think the basis of this is legislation. The Environment Act, which has just come out, has got quite a lot of information there about legalities around polluting of rivers, and ultimately it is going to have to down to legislation and also enforcement. So we need the Environment Agency to chase these people that are polluting the watercourses, because that's where the root of it is. So we are all stakeholders within our local water company. We can talk to them, but ultimately I think we need government legislation to make sure that the rivers and the waters are improved and that we can get nature back into them.
Okay, so how do we measure success? John?
Measure success on this topic of influencing, or more broadly?
Measure success in terms of 30 by 30. That is one measure, I suppose.
Gaffer cakes.
Yeah, let me just put a question to you, a specific question. Joan Lewis Jones says, I wonder how we can measure and monitor the extent of healthy ecosystems. Our predecessors conducted detailed soil analysis. Should this be an approach, or are there species which might be good indicators for nature recovery? So how do we measure success in general?
Yeah, measuring success is a big part of what businesses are always trying to figure out and do. And I think there are lots of different ways, and frankly, Martin will be a brilliant expert on all the different methods for measuring soil and species and things like that. The one thing that I think the nature organisations like ours are beginning to get better at, and could go further, is the impact of the healthy environment on people. So you can have a lot of detailed research about the specific issues affecting great crested newt or whatever it might be. And that's very valuable work. The bit that's always missed is, so what? So what for the NHS? So what for the tax income for the government? So what for the value for housing in that area? And I think at the moment there's a big gap in the research that we have done historically, which is putting a value on nature that human beings who are in decision-making positions really care about at all levels. Because if we're able to say to housing developers, your house that you build is going to command a 10% premium price per square foot because it's in a biodiverse, rich area, and the evidence for that is here. And if we're able to say to the council and the NHS and the government locally that the people in Cheshire will be healthier, and that saves you this much money in tax revenues that you're going to have to be able to spend on other things because of the fact that the River Mersey and the River Dee are now running more freely and in a healthier state through the area. I think that's a dramatic shift, and I think it's a piece that I think it's a piece that we're beginning to do much more, and we're already seeing the value to people of spending time in nature. The program we're running with GPs and with health workers to encourage more people as part of their cure to get out and about in natural environments. You know, this is putting hard value on nature in a way that hasn't been done before. And I think that has to go, of course, with the evidence of the soil improvement and the species improvement and the signal species and the apex species like beavers, currently, unless we introduce wolves or something, like beavers as a measure of the health of the ecosystem. So I think that the two have got to go together.
Thank you. Pippa, soil, measuring soil improvement.
Yeah, so farmers have already been measuring soil improvement. We used to have the soil protection review, which farmers would carry out, and we are as farmers still required to have an understanding of our soils. And you know, it's in a farmer's interest to have good soils because good soils leads to good crops. So you know, it's not in a farmer's interest to try and deplete the soil structure. We also, under cross compliance, under the good agricultural and environmental conditions, have requirements placed upon farmers to manage soil in a way which conserves its structure. So, for example, not allowing soil runoff and things like that after you've taken a crop off. So there are things that are done within the farming community to try and enhance the structure and the protection given to soil.
And should we do this on a wider basis, Martin? I mean, particularly in outside agricultural areas, and also measure impact on wildlife?
Yeah, I think so. I think as Joan alludes to in her question, I think species are really the key indicators of the health of our ecosystems. And habitats are really homes for wildlife. So few of us would choose to live in a ruin, but this is where we are with the current state of nature. Many of our towns and our cities and our countryside are habitats where only the most resilient species can survive, and the lack of diversity and abundance of wildlife shows how sick our ecosystems are. So we really should be focusing on key species to measure the success of the 30 by 30 campaign. And that again is reflected in the Environment Act. You know, they've got this target for species abundance, although it's not quite clear how that's going to be measured. And so we as a trust, we will be concentrating on a few key local species such as curlew or water vole to show us how well we're doing on achieving nature's recovery. And it is just, I mean, I've been listening to the debate this evening about value and how we put a value onto the habitats, and we've heard about monetary value through the carbon or through biodiversity net gain. But I was listening to a webinar by a guy the other week, because one thing for me, which is missed out in all of that, is species. You know, how do you put a price on birdsong? How do you put a price on sunlight on leaves? You know, that's something that you can't market. You can't put it. You can't put a monetary figure on that. And you know, what this guy in the webinar was saying is that actually people, the value of wildlife to people is that they enjoy it. Is they want to be it. They do things because they love being with animals and they love being with that wildlife. And you really can't put a price on that. So I think species are really key because they tell you the condition of the habitat, but because we've got a relationship with them and we can feel part of their lives.
We're coming very much to the end of this panel debate, and thank you all of you for an excellent discussion. I hope that those of you who we can't see, but I know are listening in, have enjoyed it and have found it stimulating. But just to round off very quickly, in a sentence only, Are you optimistic about our ability as the Cheshire Wildlife Trust to lead the 3030 project and succeed in putting it into place in Cheshire? Let me start off with Anna Maria.
I'm an optimistic kind of person, so I think that's always a good start. But generally, I find that being a member of the trust is actually quite a wonderful thing. So I'm going to say yes, because I am optimistic. But we recognise even here tonight in the panelists, that we do have hope, and we also have things to solve. So we already recognise that. So I think that's part of just the beginning of something new.
Thank you. John?
Yes, I think we have to, and necessity creates a way. I've got 3 kids. We need to sort this out.
Thank you. Pippa?
Yeah, I am optimistic that we can get to 30 by 30. I think the more we engage with landowners and farmers, the more we can do for wildlife. So yes, I'm optimistic.
And Martin?
Yes, I'm optimistic. Not only am I optimistic, I'm excited, because the things that we're going to have to do to get to 30 by 30, maybe we've never done them before. Who knows what the world will be like in 2030? Who knows what new things there will be in our countryside, what new ways of seeing nature there will be. And that for me is very exciting.
Thank you all very much. I think that's a wonderful note for us to end this 58th AGM on in the Cheshire Wildlife Trust. Can I just remind you that although I haven't counted them, there are, well, no, I'm not sure how many there are days to Christmas. You can count them for yourself. But the best and easiest solution, of course, if you're thinking about Christmas coming up, is to buy gift membership of the CWT or an adoption pack. That always goes down well, particularly with the younger members of the family. And that's really good for wildlife too. And for older relatives, it could be a rare opportunity to be part of buying back land for nature. So why not support our current Saltersford Farm appeal? There you are, all sorted. That's and what's more, all of those sorts of presents, if you are minded to give that sort of thing for Christmas, will make you feel good too. I'm sure you all would like me to join me in thanking our panel for tonight. Anna, Pippa, Richard, Anna, Pippa, John and Martin, and of course our fantastic Chief Executive and all the staff of the Cheshire Wildlife Trust, all the very hardworking 2 trustees, and above all of you members and your fellow members who are not with us tonight, but are so active on behalf of wildlife in Cheshire. Thank you very much indeed for attending this AGM. I hope we've given you lots of food for thought. And of course, we're always happy to hear from you. If you've posted questions and I've not been able to get to them, forgive me for that, but they will be answered, and any of your suggestions that you've posted will be picked up as well. So keep in touch with us. We're always ready to hear. As Martin said, we don't have all the answers, but you may well have some of the answers that we're missing at present. And in the meantime, can I say a huge thank you to all of you for all that you do in helping us make a much more healthy and sustainable Cheshire, not just for our children, but for all those future generations. Thank you very much indeed, and good night.
can stop recording as well, shall I?